Welcome, my theatrical ghouls and macabre spectators. I'm Skeleton Sam, your host for this episode. Each week, we're going to be exploring theatres that have gained a reputation in the housing of souls still clinging to this mortal coil. Tell me, are you excited to be here? Now, for this series, I did promise we will be looking at theatres and performance venues internationally. Because wherever humanity steps, it leaves behind a legacy. A legacy that may, for better or worse, refuse to stay dead. We'll look at spaces in America that became supposedly haunted on account of injustices, lack of fire safety, stage accidents in New Zealand and Australia, and opera houses with phantoms terrorising them. So, without further ado, let us begin this chapter.
How do you solve a problem like Maria?
How do you catch a cloud and
pin it down?
What are you doing?
We thought we'd start a chorus group. Karloff's idea.
I didn't have much of a vote in this.
And you thought it'd be a good idea to come in right as I'm starting the episode and setting the mood?
Well, when you put it like that.
Maybe we should look into that accommodation plan.
Yes, please do.
Again, this wasn't my idea.
Anyway, so before we look at what international venues I mentioned, I want us to travel back to London and explore a venue we've travelled to before. This venue is the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, one of the oldest London theatre spaces and believed to be one of the most haunted. The Theatre Royal Drury Lane's long history has given it a wide range of legends. The theatre's current structure, which was first built in 1812, is but the space's fourth iteration on the site of where the original once stood. The first building was constructed in the early 1660s, following the removal of parliamentary ban of theatres after their victory in the English Civil War, which culminated in the beheading of King Charles I.
Didn't you cheer when that happened?
Shush! Following the banning of theatres for over a decade, Parliament restored the monarchy.
Yay.
The performing arts and theatre spaces were once again legal and available to the general public.
Well, that's a good thing, yes.
However, like often is when working with the establishment or under a form of dictatorial powers like the aristocracy, there's always a catch. In order for the new King Charles II and his cronies to establish their control and keep a tighter leash on the performing arts, they issued letters patent to several individuals that supported them. This way, it meant only those given license by the King's government could maintain a monopoly over the London theatre scene and be allowed to become legitimate theatre to the masses. The licence to open a playhouse on Drury Lane, near Covent Garden, was given to Thomas Killigrew, a theatrical impresario who managed the King's Company, which operated under the direct sponsorship of Charles II himself. Opening in 1663 to the public, it became an instant hit, establishing the careers of artists like Nell Gwyn and many restoration comedies, including finally giving more opportunities for women actors, as before the mainstream theatre scene only allowed for men to perform on the London stage and play the female roles. Now for this next part, I'm very conscious of the runtime and know you're keen to hear about the paranormal happenings. So, to get through centuries worth of history, Karloff here is going to speed run it for us.
I thought you said I could do it.
Not after you nick my packet of wine gums. Ready, Karloff?
Ready?
And she's off.
Following a few more successful years, the original Theatre Royal Drury Lane manages to avoid, like the rest of the city, getting hit by the 1666 Great Fire of London. Luck runs out in 1674 when the building catches fire due to wooden construction. A second playhouse is built, ran throughout the 18th century by actor-manager David Garrick. Building gets knocked down in 1797 due to needing a facelift. A third playhouse is built on the site, can now accommodate almost 4,000 spectators. King George III nearly shot watching a play there, but survives. Theatre gets burnt down in 1809 due to shoddy fire safety regulations. A fourth and final building is constructed in 1812 and continues to stand to this day with proper fire safety curtain. Theatre Royal Drury Lane is currently owned by Andrew Lloyd Webber and is the site of West End musicals like Disney's Frozen. Anyone got a glass of water?
Blimey, didn't think she'd reach the end point. We're taking a quick break to let Karloff catch her breath and for me to find a cash machine to pay Mick the money for that bet on Karloff's commentary and Andi to finalise London accommodation booking. After the break, we'll be looking at multiple phantoms inhabiting the Theatre Royal Drury Lane.
Another day to live through. Better get started.
All of you freaks! Mutations!
In our present-day time, the Theatre Royal Drury Lane has attracted statements of not just being one of the oldest performance venues, but one of the most haunted. It's claimed to be occupied by 7 paranormal entities, all from the theatre's long history. Documented reports of orbs, flashes of coloured light, cold spots, electrical equipment tampered with, smells of lavender, sounds of whispering, full, ghostly apparitions, physical contact and poltergeist activity have occurred in all the areas of the theatre, from the foyer to the auditorium and the backstage areas. The most famous phantom, apart from Lloyd Webber, to haunt this venue is the mysterious Man in Grey. The Man in Grey is an unknown entity. A male-presenting figure that struts around the theatre's upper circle in an 18th century garb, complete with a sword, a riding cloak, and a tricornet over a powdered hair wig, and then disappears into a wall close to the royal box once completing his walk. Other times, he will sit in one of the seats in the upper circle, and if you get too close, he'll vanish into thin air, as one spooked cleaner found out. Now, with apparitions like this, you'd expect it to be at night time, but he's more noticeable in the daytime, and in the 1930s, a troupe of dancers were on stage doing a full company photo shoot, during which they all spotted the Man in Grey doing his walk in the upper circle. To see a ghost late at night, one could easily just put it down to tiredness and your mind playing tricks. But when an entire group of people all at once witness a strange phenomenon during the day, it becomes a little bit harder to disprove it as a skeptic. The identity of this lone wandering phantom is something of a mystery, but during a period of renovations in the 1870s, led to the discovery of a skeletal remains in a hidden room behind that very wall he would walk to and vanish. The remains wore grey clothing and a knife protruded from its rib cage. Was this the Man in Grey? Someone who could have been an admirer of an actress murdered by a rival? A dirty secret of an actor-manager? Regardless, his presence is welcomed by companies putting on shows at the venue, because when he's appeared, shows like Miss Saigon, The Keenan Eye, and a few others were massive box office hits.
I'm sure the company of Disney's Frozen couldn't let that meat go.
Though he didn't apparently appear during Noel Coward's show.
Yep, that's a ghost with a strong sense of taste.
Now, as we mentioned at the start, there are several ghosts believed to haunt the theatre. One of these, Joseph Grimaldi, is a figure we've covered in our previous series, which you can get the full story of just by clicking the link below. But if you fancy a quick rundown on him, this is the story that follows. Joseph Grimaldi, known as the father of clowns and pioneering the look of the modern clown face, was a hugely popular entertainer in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, performing multiple shows at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane and the Sadler's Wells Theatre, often on the same day. This intense workload, along with doing intense acrobatics with a lack of proper safety regulations, meant his physical health deteriorated very quickly and, following his early retirement, passed away.
Didn't he also instruct the funeral directors to chop off his head when they laid him to rest in the funeral coffin?
Why do you want that done?
A fear of getting buried alive by accident. At least a served head allows a 100% death confirmation.
Since then, his ghost has been spotted at the Sadler's Wells Theatre, plus the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, as a floating clown head without a body, and performers can feel his presence on stage, guiding and supporting them.
And giving you a kick up the backside if you aren't doing a good enough job.
Yes, that too. The next ghost believed to haunt the backstage area of the theatre is that of the Irish actor and dramatist Charles Macklin, who came to England and joined the acting company of the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, and very quickly dominated the London theatre scene for almost the entire 18th century. He gained a reputation for, at the time, groundbreaking naturalistic performances and creating more sympathetic portrayals for Shakespeare's characters, like that of Shylock, the Jewish moneylender from The Merchant of Venice, a role that before, and still is in some corners of mainstream theatre today, unfortunately done with a stereotypical anti-Semitic caricature. But these events would be clouded due to a massive scandal. One evening, in the backstage area, Macklin got into a fight with another actor over a powdered wig, and during their scuffle backstage, Macklin used the sharp end of his cane and stabbed the other actor in the eye, killing him. When the case went to court, it was claimed that Macklin was so persuasive and convincing to the judge and jury that he only got a lighter sentence for manslaughter and avoided prison time altogether. Following the trial, Macklin resumed his work in the theatre, writing many plays for the stage and even becoming the actor-manager of the Theatre Royal Drury Lane.
Must have made company meetings intense.
Especially if he brought his cane to them. That would silence oppositional voices within the company.
Charles Macklin would still continue to act on the stage, even into his twilight years, when, at 90 years old, he reprised the role of Shylock, and would eventually pass away at the grand old age of 98. For better or worse, many believed he didn't just dominate much of the theatre scene in his long life throughout nearly the entire 1700s, but even after his death, as an alleged sinister presence in the following centuries. In the time not long following his death, performers and staff backstage of the Theatre Royal Drury Lane reported feeling this sinister presence and witnessing the full-blown apparition of a tall, thin, grotesque-looking phantom that stalks the dressing rooms and the backstage areas of the playhouse before coming to a stop and vanishing at the site where MacLeod killed the other actor in their fight. If this is indeed Charles MacLeod, then perhaps the very energy, possible guilt and mindset of this man with a long history at the theatre imprinted itself within the walls of the venue like a recording of another time. Another spirit that has a deep connection to the modern theatrical traditions within the UK is that of Dan Leno. Dan Leno was a famous Victorian entertainer, born George Wilde Galvin in St Pancras, London in 1860. He rose to prominence in the music halls at the age of just 9 years old. He was highly skilled in the art of clog dancing, gaining notoriety in theatrical scenes, perfecting an act of talking about life's mundane subjects, mixed with comic songs and surreal observations, and created an host of mostly working-class caricatures to illustrate his stories. His popularity meant he'd get constant bookings to perform in the Theatre Royal Drury Lane's Christmas pantomimes, for which he perfected the role of the pantomime Dame.
So how did he die?
So, if you looked up Dan Leno's life, one thing you'll notice is that it is quite short. Later in his career, he started the habit of drinking heavily post-performances, which developed into alcoholism. This excess drinking would hasten an already physically and mentally declining Leno, who would take out his pain and frustrations onto his fellow actors. Soon, Leno's mental health and increasingly erratic behaviour led to him being sanctioned at Camberwell House Lunatic Asylum. Leno died at his home in London on the 31st of October 1904, aged just 43, following a short triumphal return to the Theatre Drury Lane's pantomime of the story of Humpty Dumpty. His cause of death is unknown, and his death and funeral were national news. The Daily Telegraph wrote in its obituary,
There was only one Dan. His methods were inimitable. His face was indeed his fortune. Who has seen him in any of his disguises and has failed to laugh?
Now, when it comes to the subject of his supposed ghost at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, there are two widely reported occurrences: the sound of clogging shoes and the smell of perfumed lavender. These phenomena are mainly in an area of the theatre's backstage that used to be Dan Leno's old dressing room, which is still in use today. Accounts report that out of nowhere, a strong smell of lavender perfume will be smelt despite no one using it.
Why lavender perfume?
Well, remember how I said in his final years he began declining physically and mentally? Part of this was in his developing terrible incontinence, which for those of you who don't know what this medical term means, it means that you will have an involuntary loss of bladder control. This made Lino cover himself in lavender-scented perfume in order to hide the smell of urine. Other reports account for poltergeist activity, manipulation of electronic equipment, and appearing in mirrors, standing next to actors.
Poor guy.
Poor guy? That's disgusting! I don't want to be thinking of being spooked by a clown dancing phantom who's wet himself.
So remember, if you're in the Theatre Royal Drury Lane during the day, keep your eyes peeled on the upper circle area, because you might spot a man in grey. Or, if you're in the backstage of a theatre and you get a sinister feeling, though you are alone in space, just remember, there's a chance you might not be truly alone. Now, this theatre has gotten the status of being one of the most haunted in all of London. Several paranormal documentaries have been produced about this playhouse, and, naturally, we are keen to hear as many stories as we can from you, our audience. So, we want you to send us your strange paranormal experiences in the Theatre Royal Drury Lane or in any other London theatre or performance space. Email skeleton.sam.theatricalghoul@gmail.com, all in lowercase, with your name and heading saying My Paranormal Experience. Thank you for tuning in. Right, Andy, you got the accommodation sorted for the night? 50 Berkeley Square. Why does that name sound familiar? Bit chilly, but decent.
I'm forever blowing bubbles, pretty bubbles in the air. They fly so high, nearly reach the sky. Then, like my dreams, they fade and die. Fortune's always hiding. I've looked everywhere. Blowing bubbles, pretty bubbles in the air. I've looked everywhere. I'm forever blowing bubbles, pretty bubbles.